Thank you everybody so much for being here. My name is Adrian Chenault. I am the CEO and one of the founders of Contact Mapping. And I have been so looking forward to this conversation, been so looking forward to the guest that we have today, who is somebody who I have only gotten to spend a little bit of time with so far, but I have tremendous admiration and respect for already. So Chad Littlefield, welcome. He is the founder of a company called We and Me, and he has trained dozens of the largest and highest performing organizations all over the United States and the world on how to create more compelling online connection. And I think you're going to find very quickly that he is somebody that no matter what you do, no matter what your experience is, that we can learn a lot from and that we're going to have a ton of fun. So Chad, welcome and great to have you here, man.
Yeah, super good to be here. Good to see all of your mugs. And if you're not able to show your mugs, cool too, right? We've been living in pixel land for long enough now that sometimes a video break in the day is useful. So whatever your opt in or opt out is good for me. Before I say anything or kind of give an official, hey, welcome, I would love to actually in the chat kick off with this question. What is something that you know really well? Before I share anything that I happen to know, what is something that you know really, really well? And just drop your response to that in the chat. And the reason, I'll give you a minute to type while I'm not talking there. So let's actually do this. While you're typing your response to this question, I'm gonna play a video that will help, it's 110 seconds or something, that will help frame up some of my work and context so that we can be speaking the same language. So whether you're coming here and you're like, so pumped to chat with Chad, this is gonna be good. Or you're like, who's Chad? I'm curious, and that's why I'm here. 110 seconds for us to get on the same page while you answer this question in the chat, and then we can have a proper conversation once we're speaking some of the same language. Sound good, Adrian?
Sounds great, love it.
All right, let's do it. Here we go. We'll see if tech works for us. To allow this to work, you're gonna want to be in speaker view so that the video shows big. I'm gonna play it in kind of an odd way, streaming through eCam for those of you who are gonna be curious in a minute.
Last week, I was the only person in the Zoom meeting with my video on.
What are we talking about or what's going on?
I had to listen to someone go to the bathroom.
One of the leaders actually fell asleep and was snoring.
The language Zoom burnout has showed up in our lexicon lately, and I think that it actually doesn't exist. I think that what exists is bad Zoom burnout.
Efficiency is the enemy of connection.
There is lots of humanity that is lost in translation when we teleport through this black hole.
How can I do this better online than in person?
Connection before content is not do a random icebreaker at the beginning of a session. Connection before content has to connect to the purpose of why you are here in this moment.
Once people are connected, they can lean forward in such a way that they want to make a difference. They will want to contribute.
The gift that all being remote has given us is we have an entire context all around us that we can interact and engage with.
Papa, be nice.
We are just beginning to understand the power of virtual connection.
I am energized and ready to go.
I'm going to connect with my online participants much more than I have been in the past.
I believe we're going to have an amazing day.
Next year is going to be so much better.
Next year be so much better. Anybody up for that?
I think that would be
I don't
good.
care if you've had an amazing
sign me
2020.
up.
There's enough happening in the world. So hopefully that provide a little bit of shared context. And maybe, Adrian, you know some of the people here with us more than I do. And so I wonder if I can flip it back to you to just share, seeing that, and for everybody else seeing that, if there's something that struck a chord or a place that we want to jump off. And I guess before I
officially throw it back to you. For everybody else, my invitation would be just as a context and framing for this to actually be a conversation, because lots of like webinars or meetings with 37 human beings on them, like we say it's a conversation, but if everybody spoke for 1 minute, we'd be done. And so how does that work? And the way that I would invite this to work is starting now, I would love to enact the law of unmutation, I call it, which is if you've got something that like you want to kick out or ask to me, to Adrian, it's like, ooh, like I think that this would benefit the group, not just me individually. Do that. Law of unmutation. If you've got something that you think will benefit everyone or at least many, unmute and share that. If you don't want to unmute and interrupt us in the middle of a sentence, my invitation is if you're talking to me or to Adrian, go ahead and type all caps in the chat. Scream at us. I call it Zoom yelling. And so all caps in the chat if you have a message for us, because otherwise I'm going to intentionally ignore a lot of stuff that's in the chat so that I can be present with you, not I definitely don't want to be president. So I can be present with you and not trying to split my brain in two, which is just not going to work very well. So
awesome.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah. So just couple things, right? I hope you feel it too. The energy of what is happening here right now is different from the energy of 99% of Zoom and virtual meetings that I have ever been a part of in my corporate career, even in our contact mapping world. Like it's hard to create a great energy. And what I love about Chad, why I was instantly attracted to him and wanted to be part of his orbit, is because I sensed that he is an expert at doing this and showing me how to do the same thing. So that's part one. And part two is that it's so fun watching, everything that, that did scroll through the chat as we were watching that video of everything, we all bring all these different perspectives to a conversation. And what the mantra is, you saw in the kind of lead up to this, that it's, what's the secret formula to have better meetings? It's connection before content. So what Chad just modeled for all of us and what you just got to participate in, where I'm seeing all these cool things that you do, that's what this is about. And so we are in the business of not just broadcast, but in receiving from each other and having a real conversation where ideas are popping. And so that's what I want for today. And that's what we want to show you how to create in all of your various worlds going forward, right?
Awesome. So as a litmus test, having just seen that video, one of my perspectives, anytime I jump in with a group, whether it's live in person with a group of 8,000 people with a very different set of life experiences each, or it's you who we're just meeting for the first time. One of my kind of theories and perspective is that, I don't even know if it's a theory, I think it's just true. You collectively are much smarter than just me. And your world, your context, what you're aiming for way better than I ever will. And so what I'd love to do now in the chat, just having seen that 2-minute video, having a little bit of shared context, what is something that sort of struck you? What is something that was like, ooh, that idea? So if it was connection before content, if it was the idea of, I don't think it's Zoom burnout, I think it's bad Zoom burnout. What's a concept that was shared in that 2 minutes that was like, this is interesting, I might be interested in exploring this? And the reason I would love for you to type that in the chat and fill that up is that will be a gauge for me of like, okay, maybe this is where we can start to direct our conversation, because Adrian and I don't have like let's map out a script, because if we had a script prepared, it wouldn't serve you best, because we don't know in this moment what you're actually needing. So energy, seeing Derek, creating a comfortable context for a Zoom meeting, authentic connection, easy engagement, quick and able to participate right away. Thanks, Mary. Yes. Need to get past the serious Robert in order to connect.
That's a good one.
There is, you are your own best thing in some way, right? So when you try to replicate somebody else's energy, you're signing up for a very inauthentic path there. And so serious may be quite lovely. And that said, if you know that there may be some benefit, I often advise and invite people when you're creating virtual experiences in a group to design for contribution, not consumption. So a webinar is designed for consumption, right? Hop on, listen to what Chad has to say, blah, 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 blah.
take notes, and then roll out. Design for contribution is, what is something you know really well? Ooh, you know about trucks and art and making LinkedIn connections and history and healthcare and sports, right? And when I see that, I get a little bit of depth of who you are. And not only that, I would argue that, we ask people to turn videos on in the beginning of video meetings so that we can see them. I would argue that maybe what's more important than that is that you feel seen. And so I didn't see actually who typed sports, but so Victor, who typed sports, when I say sports in just a tiny little way, I'm saying, hey, Victor, I know there's 38 people on this call and I see you. Thanks for contributing. And now I'm actually seeing Victor with a thumbs up there. You see how that is very, very different than a sea of anonymity on the last 75 webinars you might have been on with a group this size. So being able to create that, and I'll say one more thing and then I'll actually shut up and look at what you've typed and shared with me. But I invite people, I think sometimes we think the chat is like this separate thing. And in Zoom, it literally is like, it's this side of the screen or whatever. It's just part of the conversation. Like I think at one point, a little bell went off in my head and I realized like, oh, when Doug types trucking, like that, Doug is an actual person on the other side of my screen who actually moved his fingers and typed a word. And so because that's true, I can interact and engage with the chat and with Doug as if he's a person, not some random chat that some random whatever typed in the box, right? So for me, merging the chat and what's happening live and verbally into one is a really useful concept or idea, if you will. Whew. All right. I'm seeing Phil catching up and sharing is good with airplanes.
Yeah. So here's one thing.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question on that? So I love these cards and I think they're so powerful. And so talk about, number one, where people can get these cards because they can get them. But number two, talk about how you arrived at why is it better that you hold up that card like that compared to just asking the question?
Yeah. Super great. So, when we screen share, we maximize content and minimize connection. So I'm not saying don't ever screen share, but if your goal is to like have a conversation and connect, when you screen share, it maximizes content and minimizes connection. And so I'm a huge advocate of, looking at what can we do, what do we have access to when we're working from home or remotely that we wouldn't have access to if we were in a conference room with somebody or in an office one-on-one. And that is the context of all the stuff around us. So using, especially, if you're presenting anything virtually, really inviting people to use analog visuals. So if I'm talking about, hey, let me share some data for those who tend to think and process and experience the world logically, versus let me share a story for those of you who experience the world through feelings and emotion and that heart element. You may not remember the words that I literally just said 10 seconds ago, but you will remember this guy on this Zoom that held up these things because the brain is wired to encode visual and experiential data into long-term memory and wired to encode language and numbers into short-term memory. And I haven't seen neuroscience research on it. That is what I just shared is rooted in a whole bunch of neuroscience. What I haven't seen research on, but what I would guess is that brains are also wired to remember and really engage with novelty. And so when as soon as screen share comes up and as soon as a slide shows up, our brain says consumption, and we just go, our brain just turns off just a little bit, not completely, but just a little bit, and then we tune in. So when I hold up a 3D object, some of you, maybe not all of you, but some of you are having the experience of like, oh, he's got stuff on his desk, right? There's like, what else does he have under there? Like, this could get interesting, right? And so just that element of novelty and surprise is actually very useful from a learning and retention perspective. And from a full pause. Does that answer your question, Adrian?
It 100% does. And I think there's just so much fun. I like to joke that, the greatest day of kindergarten is show and tell day. And I think there's just something hardwired, right? That like, it's special for me to like grab a book that's meaningful to me or whatever, like just to be able to like, say this represents me And it means something to me. And to, not only do that as the facilitator, but to invite your community to do those things. That's again, yet another layer of that novelty and that memorability of an interaction that it's not every day that I'm asked to grab something from my house or my home office or my whatever and share it with the other people on the call.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of humanity. Like most people don't live in a hotel, which means because that's true, they've got potentially decades and decades worth of meaning on the floor above them, below them, on the wall across from them, right? And so inviting people to, oftentimes, as depending on the context, if I'm working with a group, we'll actually do connection before content where I'll say, hey, I'm assuming that you've been in your 3-foot Zoom jail cell for long enough at this point. Can you just take 60 seconds, leave your little virtual box here and go grab an object that represents a part of who you are or a unique strength that you bring to this group or whatever, and invite people to bring back that object to then share and show to the camera. Creates a whole different level of connection that you could not actually do that in person. Right. And so there's something really useful about the dynamic of using the stuff that's around us. I'll do it at the closing of a meeting. Go grab an object that represents one key idea or takeaway that you loved thinking about it now, but you also know you'll probably forget 3 months from now. Go grab an object that represents that and set it on the corner of your desk, so that you get that cue of connection before content. Like the next time my task-oriented brain goes straight into the agenda, let that little object remind me to just ask a question to the person that I'm meeting with, or kick off the meeting by answering a question. Yeah.
Love it.
So my sense is, looking at Zoom numbers, you all are choosing to linger on here for some reason. There's already, I see, Roderick, your question, and there's already some questions in the chat. I'm wondering if we can actually do what we said we were going to do, Adrian, and make this conversation for folks by turning it over into a little bit more of a ask me anything, follow your own curiosity as a group. So what I'll do, the way that I'll facilitate this, and feel free to ruthlessly misinterpret what I'm about to do and use it yourself. And so typically when we go to Q&A or something, we did consumption, right? We talked for a whole bunch of time and then we said, anybody have any questions? And then like your teacher in high school, you waited about 2 seconds, which isn't enough time to think of a clear question to ask publicly in a group. And then you say, no questions? Okay, move on. And so one of the best ways to avoid awkward silence is to create productive silence. So I'm going to give everybody 10 solid seconds where I'm going to invite no one to unmute and no one to say anything, to actually think of, just from the stuff that we've thrown out so far, what are you curious about? What would you love to know more about? What's a little rabbit hole? And it could be based on anything that you are naturally, genuinely curious about right now. So take 10 seconds to think of that. Roderick, I will answer your question first because you obey the rules and typed in all caps. If you want, with your question, feel free to type it in all caps in the chat, but my request is don't press send. Don't press enter. So you can type your question in the chat, but don't press enter yet. So I want to keep those questions kind of waiting or held for a minute. So 10 seconds. Nobody's going to say anything. Isn't it kind of remarkable? That was probably even 8 seconds. Silence is one of the great, very lost arts of meaningful conversation. We live in a culture that one feels the need to label silence as awkward, unproductive, whatever, and doesn't create very much silence. If you're familiar with Susan Cain's TED Talk or her book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. She talks a lot about this idea that we very much overvalue people who think first and speak quickest, and undervalue some really important perspectives of people that need a minute. All right, people who maybe tend to be a bit more introverted. So Adrian, first of all, I'm just like on a train right now. Are you feeling this train? Is this working for you?
I love this train. I'm all about this train. Keep it going.
All right. So as promised, Roderick, so do I find the chat can be distracting? 15 minutes before I got married, I had a mentor. Everybody's coming up and saying some version of like, congrats, I'm so happy for you. I had one mentor, his name's Jeff, and he walked up to me, no niceties whatsoever. He put his hand on my right shoulder. He looked me dead in the eye and he said, are you present? Because you really don't want to miss your own wedding. Dude, geez, that's intense right now. I got a lot on my mind. I'm about to make a fairly permanent decision here. This is big. What I learned from that, though, and how this relates to the chat is if you didn't ask me that and I didn't choose to answer that with a yes, I would have been there physically at my own wedding, but I would have missed it. I think the same is true in meetings. If you try to be fully present with the chat and fully present here with people, you will not be present for one of them at any given time. So there's a ton of research. Like, I don't care how good of a multitasker you think you are, you're only good at switching back and forth really quickly. The brain, they've done so many studies that the brain is not capable of doing two things fully at the exact same time. And so the way that you can multitask is by switching back and forth really quickly. So yes, I find it distracting, which is why I only choose certain times to tune into it. I have a mentor I really respect who every time he looks at the chat, if he's giving a webinar, especially if it's like 300 people and it's much more one-way delivery, he puts on a pair of glasses to signal like, hey, I'm not focused on you people right now. I'm focusing on what you've written. And it's just a slight visual cue that just kind of tunes people into like, I'm actually deeply engaging with you right now and I'm in conversation with you, but it just looks like me quietly reading. And that has been, I'm right on the edge of needing glasses, but I'm not there yet. So I just got my miniature pair here to be able to do that. And realistically, I don't actually use these very often to do that. It's a little too cheeky for me. But to share the idea, sometimes I will say, all right, let's do questions. Ask me anything. I'm going to pull up a chair. And you see how that just shifts state. And I think, our state and the group state matters much more than script. In in-person meetings too, but especially virtual meetings, state matters way more than script. And so you can spend all freaking day on your slides or your pitch or your whatever it is. If the person you've just teleported in with is not in a state to receive that, and you haven't done anything to shift your state to kind of be in the same state of mind, then you might as well just speak Mandarin for the rest of the meeting, because it's not gonna, the chances that it's fully gonna get retained is fairly low. Okay, how many of you, just by a show of real hands or digital hands, have something typed into the chat but haven't pressed enter? All right, a good little handful. So on the count of 3, 2, 1, go ahead and hit enter with whatever you've got typed into the chat, that question in all caps. And if you need a minute to actually type it. So one question that you're naturally curious about based on what we've unpacked so far. Go ahead and hit that all caps in the chat. Adrian, I saw you put state matters more than script. That is credit to Matt Church.
All right.
That's a great phrase that I have ruthlessly stolen myself and attributed credit to.
That's good.
All right. Cool. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit enter with your question. Greco or Graco, if you have the ability to unmute, can you add some context to your question? I would love to answer it.
Hi, this is me, Graco. Gamification is the theory where it's not gaming and it's not education, but where you use elements to engage with audiences in a much more fun way, where you use elements of like video gaming and to make a more compelling engagement with people. So what I'm seeing you use is elements of gamification to be able to do that engagement. But I don't know if this is prepared, if there are those elements behind that, psychologically, or it's just, an idea that was brought up.
Yeah. Okay, so let me answer your question, Graco. First of all, thank you for sharing. Let me try to answer your question and Elizabeth's question and Phil's question in sort of the same response here. So Elizabeth's question is, how the heck did you discover all of this? Phil's question is around how do you get people to participate? And I think the two are, or these three questions are interrelated for me. So from a background standpoint, my background is in experiential and adventure learning and education. And so that idea of gamification, I used to teach a team development and leadership development class at Penn State University, where I used to have 30 students take all their desks and pile them in a giant, massive heap in the back of the room. And we did stuff for 3 hours. It was all experiential learning. It was focused around, team and leadership development. So we were doing exercises that usually were very gamified. And what I mean by that is there was an objective that people had to get to. Now, maybe the ultimate aim was to get to know each other better, was to create some conflict in the group so that we could debrief it and unpack how to navigate conflict. But the objective was put out there. And I think for me, a game has a point. And so sometimes when I'll do things, I'll say my framing of what I'm about to do even over Zoom is like, all right, your goal here is to win. And the goal is to get as many points as possible. Here's how you get points: by typing questions in all caps in the chat that are relevant and useful to everybody, for example. That's just a quick off the cuff example. So that's one. In terms of getting people to participate, really some really core philosophy that goes on in the back of my brain. One is this concept and framing of challenge by choice, which means I want people to choose the level to which they engage, right? I don't want to, you can't and shouldn't force people to participate at a level beyond their comfort. And so creating choice and option. So oftentimes, I don't think I answered your question before, Adrian. So the cards I've been holding up is a deck that I created called We Connect Cards. It's a deck of 60 questions when I was in my nerdy academic days of like these 60 questions that are best at creating and accelerating building a relationship of trust. And so they're used in organizations all over the world, much to my surprise. To be honest, I created it to solve a problem, which is every conversation begins with, how are you? Where are you from? What do you do? And I was like, people have a lifetime of experience, and we get together with somebody and we ask, where are you from? It was like, I can think of 50 better options than that, that could actually create more meaningful, compelling conversations, and yet we don't. So the other piece of context, my co-founder, the person you saw in that video throughout, Will Wise, and I wrote a book called Ask Powerful Questions, Create Conversations That Matter. And the whole frame of that, and I'm getting a little bit away from gamification here, Rocco, but the whole framing idea behind asking powerful questions is, kids between the ages of 3 and 5 ask between 300 and 400 questions per day. Any guess in the chat on how many questions adults ask per day? Or unmute and kick them out. Toilet flush, yes. Right on cue. Excellent. 30 questions, 50 questions. Any other guesses on how many questions adults ask per day? 10. Roger, we're getting closer. Adults on average ask between 6 and 12 questions per day. So we go from kids. Now I'm certain as heck not advocating that we go back to age 3 to 5. Any of you have had 3 to 5 year olds and raised kids, or who have grandkids, or whatever, know that like it's pretty intense. It's an interrogation, not so much a conversation. But my question to you in terms of engagement, in terms of designing your meetings for contribution, is what if you were to double that count? Because I'm assuming out of those 6 to 12, half of them are like, what's for dinner? And when are you getting home today, or whatever, right? And so when we start off a meeting and the first thing on our agenda is a question, that meeting is immediately different, and it completely shifts the conversation from let me sort of dominate, take lead over this and share, and it flips it completely to say, I want to hear and see what you have to offer. is a really important shift to start speaking a little bit less in periods and a little bit more in question marks. Is a really useful concept. All right, full stop. I'm going to just stop the train completely, Adrian, and give you the keys or the train, or if anybody else has something burning that they're like, ooh, I want to ask, go for it. But I'm just going to do a full pause because I think I've thrown enough gasoline on the fire, maybe.
Yeah, I love the questions. And so definitely feel free to keep them coming as this is for you to, to learn and to grow together. Couple things that maybe I'll throw out there just to continue to stimulate the conversation, Chad. So one is, how do you create more, like we talked about interaction in terms of asking questions. Are there other things, maybe even in practical terms, to help create more sort of safety inside of a meeting where, maybe it's in a corporate environment and, you don't want just the big wigs to be doing all the talking. You want that junior analyst to be able to say, to ask a question or to express an opinion. Like, how do you create safety in whatever context in a virtual environment like this?
Yeah, so let me invite everybody to, in the chat, can you just type your context, so I can speak specifically to some of your contexts. Can you just type your context in the chat? So whether if it's a specific company or big corporate, small company, just give me like a teeny little phrase or snapshot of your context so that I can speak to that rather than generally. Because in my work, right, I get to work with big universities and medium-sized businesses and Fortune 100 groups, and they're very different based on how you create that. So just take 2 seconds. What's just a snippet of your context, even a solopreneur or duopreneur. Also building a community on Facebook, small meetings with senior executives, multi-level marketing, small business partnership. Douglas, thanks for all caps. I'll come back to that question. Starting a travel photography business. Nice. Okay, so I don't know how useful that was because your contexts are all over the place a little bit. So let me start out with this overall framing. If you haven't seen it or come across it, Google launched a few years ago, launched a massive study called Project Aristotle, where they were looking to unpack what are the characteristics of the highest performing teams at Google and their 100,000 plus employee base. And the number one characteristic of high performing teams that they found, and by the way, Google's a company that likes data, in case you didn't know that, right? They like your data and my data, and they really like their employees' data. And so this is research gained off of an immense amount of data on how teams function. So the number one characteristic that came back was the degree of psychological safety in that team, which in a small meeting with senior executives, Robert, that sounds like rainbows and butterflies, right? Psychological safety, what? And yet Google, on all this data, I found, the number one characteristic was not like years of technical experience. It wasn't the perfect Myers-Briggs personality match. It was, right? It was the degree of psychological safety, which is a term sort of coined by, at Harvard, I cannot believe Amy Edmondson, who talks about it, essentially PhD terms for interpersonal trust. And Google, when they train and onboard people, they actually talk about it from an inclusivity perspective of when people show up, are you missing out on ideas? Because back to somebody's question in the chat, because people have a fear of like feeling silly or looking dumb when they share something. Because if that dynamic is present, you are objectively missing out on some very valuable, potentially revenue generating ideas or relationships or whatever. And so for me, and where all of my work is focused, is the way to increase that psychological safety is there are lots of ways to increase interpersonal or trust in general. I focus very specifically on the social and human connection component because I don't know what percentage it is, but I think it's a huge percentage of trust. So sure, like reliability, do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you show up on time? Things like that, sure, are a part of trust, but a massive percentage is how do I feel about you? Do I feel comfortable enough to speak my mind when I'm in front of you? Or do I keep silence for fear, or kind of float under the radar for fear of my head getting cut off? And so for me, this is all of my work, right? This is why I get hired to go in and work with organizations to help them increase psychological safety. So in like 7 minutes, I'm not going to be able to give you every single thing. It is one of the reasons that we have created tools around it. But one of the lowest hanging fruits is this idea of connection before content. And low hanging because it doesn't have to take a lot of time. And actually, when you weave connection before content into many of your meetings and many of your gatherings, whether they're small group or large group, it does what like going to the gym for 20 minutes a day does, which you get healthier when you go to the gym 20 minutes a day. If you want to get healthy though, don't go to the gym on Monday for 12 hours. You're going to hurt yourself. And yet most of the time we think about psychological safety like that. We're like, oh, Google published a study about psychological safety. Let's have an all-day team building event. And we're like, right? And so that's going to the gym for, fine, do that, right? Maybe it's good to have like harder workout days, if you will, but weaving small doses of health into, or connection into your group is going to make a much different impact on the culture. So for me, just to be clear, connection before content has to have 3 ingredients. It has to, like that video mentioned, or like I mentioned in that video, it has to connect people to the purpose of why they're actually there. And that is most frequently missed by like icebreakers or things that give people hives, because going around and just sharing like something like nice that happened this weekend is fine, but it doesn't connect to why you're actually there. And so for all the critics and curmudgeons who hate the idea of starting with an icebreaker and wasting all that time, when you connect to purpose, it creates a little bit more buy-in of like, okay, I'm answering this question and sharing. An example of that might be, actually, can somebody just unmute and tell me the topic or intention in just a real short of a next meeting that they have, a next like group gathering that you've got on your calendar right now? So an intention or the topic of that meeting. I want to just use it as an example and create a question around that will allow you to create some connection before content.
So business referral networking.
Okay, 50, business referral networking.
Yeah, 50.
Luis, I saw you unmute. Do you have another one you want to toss out? Louise?
I was trying to figure what it, but it's taking responsibility for your health.
Okay.
That's actually, I have a presentation.
So maybe after this, you can, as I just throw, and that's the only context that I have for you right now. I haven't met either of you. And so for the referral marketing, a really great connection before content question might be, who is somebody that has referred you in the past month and how did they do it? And then split up, depending on the size of your group, the idea of connection before content is you split up into smaller groups to share that little story or account before you come back to the large group. And so inviting people, one of the easiest, the second ingredient of connection before content is it's got to create space or at least choice for authenticity and vulnerability. One of the easiest ways to do that in connection before content is to ask people for a story. When you ask people for an idea or like, what's your number one tip for referral marketing? And then you split people out into groups, you invite ego to come out and speak, as opposed to if you say, what's a story of someone specifically who referred you and how did they do it? Ego might still be present, probably will be, but when you ask for a story, it strongly encourages people to just tell the truth, not to overinflate the usefulness of their advice, not to give advice that they haven't actually even practiced. A story is just, right, you're able to reflect, and it also tells a lot about that person's context because stories usually have details. And when details come out, each detail is an additional potential question or curiosity path. And I have learned to believe that conversations are, whether we actually act like they are or not, conversations are exponentially expanding. And what I mean by that is, even when I said, hey, can you share some context. And Louise, you said, well, I'm not sure quite what to call it. And this, like, in just that like 2 sentences that you said, I learned a few things about you. And some of them might have been assumptions. And each one of those things that I learned can be, I can turn that into a question and go down another path. And so if you've been married for 30 years and you sit down at dinner and you don't know what to talk about, thinking about, I think for me, and I had a very hard reality check just the other day where I realized with my wife, Kate, that after 7 years of being married, like I somehow wound up in the rut of feeling like I know her. And when my curiosity for Kate dies, I would say our relationship starts to die. And I think the same is true for customers and the people that we work with. When we know someone and we put them in a box, right, there's nothing left to be explored, right? Including ideas that may benefit you or them or the company or whatever else. And so that idea of shifting from a mindset of knowing to learning, that's why when you see, like, if you've ever been a part of a big company and they're like, oh, we want to be a learning organization. It's like, that's why. Because if you're not, you're actually dying. You're like quickly dying, actually. Oh, okay, man.
I like the British accent on that. That was a nice touch.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I had my mentor in grad school was British, so I have his permission to make fun of that and butcher the accent.
There we go. All right. So I put in the chat, if anybody has any final burning questions that you don't feel like have been addressed yet, I want to make sure we grab those before we go. So all caps in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask one of those. I see Elizabeth waving her hand. Elizabeth.
I do have a question. Chad, I would love to hear how you would go about this. I have come from, teaching myself, and we used PowerPoints all the time. I'm trying to walk away from PowerPoints because, again, exact same thing. I'm curious, what would be the best way, and I actually typed it in here. I don't know if I can go back to, no, I'm not going to be able to do it the exact same way, but if you were walking away from PowerPoints and trying to get more interaction, but still needed to go over information or present information with statistics and things like that, how would you do that without those things? What would you feel would be the best way to do that and still get the point across?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Whenever I bash PowerPoint, I always need to lift it up a little bit or offer some, because it is how it works. So right. I'll say 2 things about that. One, when Microsoft designed and built PowerPoint, I don't think they said, how are good ideas formed and communicated? And can we put that into an easy template so that the entire world can conform their ideas to title bullets? I think that an idea, and I got this idea from a group that I'm part of called Thought Leaders Business School. And it's out of Australia. Matt Church is actually one of the ones who runs it. Brilliant group. And they talk about full spectrum thinking. And they actually have this thing called a pink sheet. That's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that is, if you fill it out, it's a full spectrum idea. So if I share with you a stat about Google, that reaches some people. Right. If I share with you a story about a time, and I'll do this right now, Elizabeth, that I was working with Crayola and helping actually make their some of their global meetings more engaging. And they actually sent me their slide deck and said, okay, there's 45 slides filled with bullets and titles. And they're like, we have to get this information across. How do we make this more engaging? And I said, I will look at the content in detail, but before I even get there, thumbnail view. I'm just looking at the thumbnails, and I went every 7 slides. I just inserted a blank slide. And I said, at these blank slides, before we even look at the content, do something at this slide, at this blank slide, to invite people to contribute their perspective, what they know, what they have to offer based on what the previous slide says. So you see how that is you're scripting in contribution. Now, what we ended up doing as we got into it was okay, maybe actually we should move this blank over here. And there's better ways to do that. So one other example is, I think when we present PowerPoint, sometimes we forget that people can read. If you are presenting a PowerPoint, chances are your audience is literate. And so just one way to do this is to just put up a slide that has some whole bunch of context, especially if it's data. You don't put up a graph or 5 bullet points. Put up a slide and say, you've got 30 seconds to digest this, condense it into one key phrase or takeaway, and type that in the chat. Do you see how like all of a sudden your PowerPoint, like people are way more likely, by the way, to remember what you've said because they've passed that information through their gray matter and reported out. And not only that, you've just created the most valuable chat of the session, which is everybody's like, what's the point really? And you get everybody, it's also for you as the presenter, a great litmus test to know, oh, wow, like my entire group thinks the point is this, but actually it's this. And we need to like, whoop, switch gears completely.
Well, I love that. That was awesome. Thank you.
That's really cool. That's good. Sorry.
One thing as we're wrapping up here, I forgot. So if I'm like pitching something that costs money, I also think that information should be free. And so I give lots of it away for free. So if you want the link that I just put in on a weekly basis, I put out video tutorials on how to do things like this. And so if this would interest you, feel free to check that out. And when you sign up for that, it'll lead you to a page with a bunch of free resources. And one of them is a digital version of several of the questions in the We Connect card deck, an excerpt from the first chapter of Ask Powerful Questions, which can be quite transformative to meetings, etc. So yeah, drop an email. I'm happy to be in conversation. That actually, if you hit reply to one of those emails or letters, it actually goes to me. I may be very slow in responding, or Eliza might respond on my behalf, but I will get back to you. So if I ever spend time live like this with a group in person, I always want to invite a way to end the conversation. I've been incessantly emailing the CEO of Zoom, trying to get him to change the leave or end meeting button in Zoom to be continued, but he hasn't responded. So
that's awesome. That should be. You should be on. It's Zoomtopia today. You should be on their stage, man. I'm telling you.
I have to say, I've been watching some Zoomtopia stuff, and I'm like, dude, I need to get hired by Zoom because they need some help with some of these presentations that are happening. I shouldn't say that live. Can we delete that part of the recording?
I won't. I promise I won't send that part to Eric one.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. So I'm so glad you did that, Chad. Thank you. So do really go check out his website and go buy some of these cards. I'm telling you, it's not a lot of money, and it really, I've been playing around with it. It makes a big difference in the quality of your interaction. So go do that. The other thing I want to invite you to is that this contact mapping thing, some of you are seasoned veterans of the contact mapping world. Some of you saw this on LinkedIn, said this sounds interesting, and have no idea what the hell even contact mapping is. And I'm really glad that both of those categories of people are here. But contact mapping does two things. One is it is the most powerful tool imaginable to really create meaningful connection, so that when you create this connection before content, that it is a to be continued. It's not a one and done. It's actually an ongoing relationship that serves you and the other person through their career. And we have a free app and a premium app that are remarkable, but you can use it completely for free. But the thing I want to specifically invite you to right now is to go to community.contactmapping.com, because what we do all the time is we are all about creating community like this. And we want to invite you to be a part of that conversation with us. And we're bringing people from all walks of life. And so it's really powerful. It's a lot of fun. I now have dozens of new ideas to make it even more fun than it ever was before. So thank you to Chad for that. But do just click on that. You can create an account. It lives on something called Mighty Networks, which is this amazing platform for deep, authentic connection. And we need you. So come and join us over there. So community.contactmapping.com. And then the overall website is weand.me for everything that Chad's doing. You want to be a part of both of those things. So with that, Chad, I just want to thank you so much for taking some time with our crew. This was so awesome to see some faces I haven't seen in a long time from earlier phases of life. And it's just awesome to see these kind of worlds melding together. And so thank you for being the spark that allowed that to happen today.
Yes, total joy to be here, and thanks. It would have been really boring if it was just me that turned up. So thanks to everybody else who came up with this. I would argue that this was good, largely in part because of the contribution that everybody made. Because if you didn't ask questions, I would have just talked about what I was thinking about today, and that's not so useful. Which, by the way, is what we do typically in meetings. So, thank you.
Totally.
Super joy to be here.
All right, so in that realm of Chad, this is not goodbye, it's to be continued. And I invite you to unmute yourself, to say goodbye, to do a happy dance, whatever you want to do. And let's get out there and make it an awesome day. So thank you all so much for being here. Have a tremendous day. Let's all thank Chad, and we'll see you soon.
Thank
you, Chad, so much.
Bye. Continue.
Cheers, y'all.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You all are awesome. Thank you so
guess if
very
you're-
much. Go ahead.
Thank you.
No. I was going to say, if you're choosing to linger with questions too, I mentioned the video tutorials. Just recently invested a whole bunch of effort and time and money in hiring a YouTube production agency to help me put out daily YouTube tutorials too. So we'll send out cool. One of my favorite ones each week over that list, but link to the channel right there, which has that video shared with you and some other resources. So usually if you're not the first one to find the red end meeting button and you stick around, that's something you might be interested in. So bonus if you didn't say goodbye already.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just linked.
Great stuff. Thank you so much.
And these YouTube people tell me that you can subscribe or something on YouTube.
Yeah,
you should maybe consider doing that. I don't know.
Come on, you got to get smash that like button, subscribe.
Smash the like button.
There you go.
All right. Hey, I'm gonna jump off here as well. Adrian, this is a joy to hang out. Thanks for the invite. Elizabeth, good to meet you, and good to see the rest of you. And so I'm not gonna say good to meet you yet, because that requires a little bit more proper meeting. So good to almost meet you, and maybe we'll cross paths properly at another time.
Bye. Thank you so
Bye,
much for
everybody.
being with us today, Chad.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks,
See ya.
Chad.